Sai Ram, everyone. As the last gentleman said, it was a hard act to follow after lunch. Well, there's a very hard act to follow. Thank you. Swami wants to meet you tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock at the Punachandra Auditorium, and please bring your boomerangs. Those were the words spoken to me in Puttaparthi years ago, but I'll come back to them a little later. First, I'd like to pay my respects to local Aboriginal elders past and present, and more broadly to Aboriginal peoples across Australia who gave boomerangs to the world. My talk today has 4 parts: significance of the boomerang, my journey with boomerangs, experiences with Sai Baba, and the spiritual boomerang. The boomerang story begins in the ancient Dreamtime legends of Aboriginal peoples long before this land was called Australia. The oldest evidence of boomerangs in the world is 25,000 years found in painted rock art in Arnhem Land, Northern Territory. And wooden boomerangs in South Australia have been carbon dated to 10,000 years old. Legends which include boomerangs can be found along Australia's coastlines, in the vast outback, and even in the cosmos. For example, Uluru, or Ayers Rock, in Central Australia, has its own boomerang story. Another refers to the coloured beach sands on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, while the night sky provides the legend of constellation Scorpius. There were many types of boomerangs in traditional culture throughout most of the continent, but not Tasmania. There are 2 major categories: non-returners, which were used for hunting, fighting and ceremony, and the returners or comeback boomerangs that were mostly used in sports and games before Europeans arrived. Much later, in the 1830s, after explorers and settlers in Australia spread news of the amazing returning boomerang, it became known in parts of England, Ireland and the United States. Of course, I wouldn't be talking about it today, and the conference would not have its name if the boomerang wasn't famous for coming back. That's exactly why I'm standing here. The boomerang is a significant object and symbol of Australia and has been used in tourism, advertising and product promotion for many decades. On the Australian $50 note, we see David Unipon. He was an Aboriginal man from South Australia whose research into the flights of boomerangs helped him design a helicopter before World War I. More recently, 3 stylised boomerangs were featured in the logo of the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. The boomerang, of course, has its place in music, and we've already heard the theme song of the conference. And it includes those lovely words, boom, boom, boomerang. But also, in the older days, traditional times, Aboriginal clansmen held 2 boomerangs and clapped them together to keep rhythm while chanting. Various contemporary songs feature them. Swedish pop group ABBA recorded Bang a Boomerang. Australian country music legend Slim Dusty sang The Boomerang Tree, and British singer Charlie Drake released My Boomerang Won't Come Back, which became a worldwide hit. International companies also recognise the significance of the boomerang. For example, there is a Boomerang TV network in the USA. Google has a Boomerang plug-in for Gmail, and Instagram has an app called Boomerang. So it's very, very widespread, the use of it. My own boomerang journey began when I was a sports instructor in New South Wales in the 1970s. One skill we taught the children was boomerang throwing, and to improve my knowledge, I researched Aboriginal culture. I've always been interested in sport, playing cricket, tennis, athletics, rugby and rugby league, and also horse riding and show jumping. Two of my events in athletics were discus and javelin throwing, so my arm was always ready for throwing sports boomerangs. I crafted my first boomerang in 1976, and in the early 1980s heard about the Australian Boomerang Throwing Championships and entered the competition. I didn't do very well that first time, but a few years later won my first Australian title, then went on to win more events in following years. During this time, I started a business to teach tourists how to throw and to sell corporate gift boomerangs, and these culminated in the opening of my boomerang shop in the Rocks, Sydney. These ventures became successful, and I was also sponsored, while I was Australian champion, to Canada, France, United States, South Korea and New Zealand for TV appearances and throwing demonstrations. I've also been a member of the Australian boomerang team at the World Championships. So the boomerang has been very good to me, and I always carry some in my luggage whenever I travel, especially overseas. This was the case 26 years ago in 1993 when I visited India, Puttaparthi and Sai Baba's ashram, all for the very first time. Within days of arriving at the ashram, the principal of the high school and the warden of the senior boys' hostel visited me at Shed 20, where I was accommodated, with an amazing invitation. And like I just said, it was, "Swami wants to meet you tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the Purnachandra auditorium, and please bring your boomerangs." The next morning, with a selection of boomerangs, I walked expectantly to the Purnachandra auditorium and was ushered inside under one of the roller doors. There was Sai Baba sitting, actually down on ground level, surrounded by about 300 students, while he encouraged boys up on the stage as they gave talks and presentations. I was quickly guided over to him by the warden, who asked me to show some boomerangs. Swami held them, looked at them closely, and said, "Very nice, very nice." Then the warden asked me to demonstrate throwing, and 300 boys moved back and out of the way. Remember, we are inside the auditorium. I didn't have any indoor boomerangs, but just short-range models, nothing over 30 metres. And I threw the first one out and it partly circled, landing about 10 metres on my left and skidding along on the concrete floor. I readjusted my release and the next boomerang landed just 5 metres in front of me. The conditions, like today, were totally calm and therefore challenging. I picked up a 20-metre range model and threw with a lot more spin. It circled and came closer and closer and in for the catch. The boys cheered and clapped, then Swami asked, "Who wants to learn this?" About 300 hands shot into the air. They were so enthusiastic, and Swami nodded to them while smiling. Then I was invited to take photos of him and stay for lunch. This rare and wonderful experience continued for about 3 hours, but that story is for another time. On the following morning at darshan, Swami asked the warden, "Where is that boomerang man?" He had already walked through the ladies' and gents' sides and was on the veranda of the beautiful pink and light blue mandir. This was before Sai Kulwant Hall was built. And in those days we sat in the open. Immediately, 2 students ran out and found me, and I was directed into the interview room. Again, that's a story for another day. The next day at the Hillview Stadium, I joined students who had come to their first ever boomerang throwing lesson. We had a lot of fun. They learned the basic techniques, and just after we finished, Swami and a VIP guest arrived by car, and I was asked to demonstrate more throwing. After my throws and catches, Swami waved to me. And I automatically waved back. It was just the natural thing to do on that occasion. And that was the last day of seeing him on 3 consecutive days and introducing the boomerang. Now let's fast forward 22 years to early December 2015 or 2015. I arrived in Puttaparthi with boomerangs in my bag and went to the senior hostel to say that I'd be happy to teach any students who were interested. As usual, the university was very busy, and preparations for the annual sports and cultural meet, often called Sports Day, in January had begun. I gave a talk to students, and about 50 boys later came to the first throwing session at Hillview Stadium. While this was happening, the warden and boys decided to present a boomerang performance on Sports Day. So, based on test throwing, I selected 16 students for the training squad, and then it was all systems go. We had barely 4 weeks to become a polished and highly skilled team ready to perform in front of thousands of people on the 11th of January 2016. We trained twice each day, with only 1 day off. Not only was this a hectic schedule, the boys also had to train for the march past under the strict guidance of an Indian Army officer, and the musicians in the squad also had to fit in band practice. The new Boomerang boys called themselves the Boomers. That was their idea. I told them it was the name of the Australian men's basketball team, but they didn't worry about that. They trained very hard, practicing throwing and catching, adapting to whatever wind conditions arose in the stadium. We also shared space with a large group of student cricketers, so we had to avoid each other's missiles. The ground was also being watered section by section, and some athletics races were also held while we trained. And up near the VIP stands, roller skating and gymnastics teams were also training. Imagine being in this atmosphere twice a day for a month. Visualise the backdrop. Large signs like billboards with photos of Sai Baba and his sayings such as, "Life is a challenge. Meet it. Life is a game. Play it." And behind the ladies' stadium seats, the tall, large statues of Krishna, Shiva, Jesus, Buddha and others, and high above on top of the hill, distinctive Hanuman looking down on the whole scene. And there we were, a boomerang coach, 3 university staff members, and a boomerang team enjoying the oldest sport in the world. What a privilege. And because the stadium is so big and sports boomerangs are so small, the students invented a whole new game to make the boomerangs more visible to the audience. They called it Boomerang Baseball and involved a sequence of throwing and catching. It was fast, exciting, and they did a lot of running. We also spray painted the boomerangs in bright colours so they were easier to see while in flight. On most days, we finished our afternoon session near sunset, and on some nights the warden and students insisted that I eat in their dining room before I went to my accommodation in the village. They literally invited me into their Puttaparthi home, another privilege courtesy of Swami students. In January and February this year, 2019, I went to 2 villages not far from Puttaparthi, and demonstrated throwing at a high school. The children were enthralled and very keen to learn, so I hope to return to that school and visit others on my next trip to India. Now a change of pace, and it's the spiritual boomerang, which our wonderful brothers have been talking about before this session. But before that, those deeper meanings, let's look at the word. Visualise boomerang in your mind's eye. Just look at it. What can you see? Probably 9 letters. That's a start, but what else? Which 2-letter word is hidden in plain sight? Can you see it? I just heard it somewhere. I can see Om. Anyone else see Om? Om is in boomerang. Okay, there it is right in front of us. Every time we see or say that word, Om is in the word boomerang. Could this have any connection with Sanskrit or Hindu traditions? Or is it simply a random occurrence? Let's hold those thoughts and look at the boomerang's returning flight. During the training period for Sports Day, a special yellow T-shirt was designed by the students. On the back, in a boomerang shape, was printed, "What goes around comes around." They knew it had a deeper meaning. They understood that this phrase describes a metaphor for life. And expressed in another way, what we give out comes back. To paraphrase the Bible, as you sow, so shall you reap. Isn't it like the concept of karma, which resonates in Jain, Sikh, Hindu and Buddhist teachings? Isn't the boomerang's flight the law of cause and effect? In 2002, Swami said, "We pray for the welfare and health of all. Never wish for the misfortune of anybody. The harm that you do to others will boomerang on you." Further, the boomerang may embody an even larger and more profound meaning. Here are 2 quotes from my book, The First Boomerang, where the main character hears the universal voice in the deep silence of outback Australia. The ancestors and gods gave the boomerang as the symbol of a soul's journey from the universal love energy to planet Earth and back to the universal love energy. Doesn't that sound like a journey from the source back to the source? Thank you, everyone. Sai Baba for now.